Well, good afternoon and welcome back to An Altered Life with Thomas. That's me. Thank you for joining. It's great to have you here. I've noticed in the past couple of episodes there has not been a lot of commentary. So if you like what's going on here, definitely subscribe, definitely shoot some comments below because it does stimulate some great conversation, gets me thinking, gets you thinking. And as we think and change perspective, we begin to change and alter our life. Both make it different and recognize the sacredness of it. Here we are today. Today is a day to get into paradox. And I love living in paradox. And I think there's an aspect of living in paradox that I love. And that is simply that we get to live out of logical thinking. And I don't know about you, but I grew up in a logical world. I was trained in a logical world. I was told the more logical I was, the better I could be, the more successful I would be. And somehow, with this massive use of logic, we could move beyond and have the best life ever. I don't know why I did not subscribe to that. And there are those people out there who use amazing amounts of logic that blow my mind, and more power to it. I'm not saying logic is bad. And if anything, paradox invites deeper logic, or maybe an elevated logic. I have a friend who describes science as this kind of dartboard. And those who are throwing darts right at the center, they're on point, they're doing what they need to be doing, they're researching what needs to be researched. Like there's a lot of tension right around the center of that dartboard. But there are scientists who are throwing darts around all the edges of that dartboard, and they're really working on the fringe of the world. Then you have those scientists who go way beyond. Those scientists who really change the world because they're not throwing darts at the target. They're not throwing darts at the fringe. They are throwing darts way off the dartboard, and they are creating a larger dartboard, a larger realm to dig into and uncover. So let's get into this a little bit. Paradox. The way I define it is the way I did define it, two truths that don't allow for the other truth to exist. So in a way, they cancel each other out. This is the kind of the way I thought about it before I began. Then I looked it up. And this is the definition that I found around paradox. It's kind of abbreviated, so bear with me. A statement or proposition that is self-contradictory, illogical, non-acceptable, senseless, though when investigated, may prove to be true. That's the fun part. That's the fun part. In our being raised, in our first world programming, in our following our parental stories or parental reasoning or cultural reasoning, our investigation runs, let's admit, kind of shallow or on the surface. If it makes sense, it makes sense. Yet the more people get conscious and the more people kind of grow into their own perspectives, they realize, well, it makes sense. And it's kind of like to a 3-year-old, Santa makes sense. And when you dig in, something else begins to make sense. We begin to question, and then we find a deeper truth, and we find how illogical it is. And I don't think it's comfortable for us to acknowledge that as adults, or at least in adult bodies, that a lot of times we still operate as kids. We our emotional intelligence or our spiritual intelligence or our intellectual intelligence kind of only goes so far, and sometimes we're not given the opportunity to really deepen it. So paradox for me speaks to the multidimensional self, because we can look at logic, what's logical for living in our society. We can look at what's logical for health, given the information we're given. It was logical at one point to not run a 4-minute mile or to not be able to break that. But the multidimensional self recognizes that there's multiple places in which our consciousness can be operating in simultaneously. Multiple consciousnesses, or our conscious can be in multiple places running life simultaneously. That in and of itself is going to tend to paradox. It's like being this massive warrior and this massive nurturer, even at the same time. Paradox also speaks to the ever-evolving and changing self. And that is, in one moment, we can be living in absolute truth, yet we can recognize there's a deeper understanding or a deeper knowing, but we may not be ready to live it. Or if we live it, it's going to counter a current story that also needs to change. Meaning we all are born into a world perspective, and we either decide to own that one or we decide to create and build our own. And oftentimes when we're given one and we believe that one and things happen, experiences happen outside of that worldview or that personal perspective, we don't know what to do with it. And we're like, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. Actually, I remember this once. I was driving in San Francisco. I wasn't driving, I was in the back seat. I was with a crew of people. We were lost. And we looked out the window and it was kind of dusk. So, things are a little bit gray, a little bit fuzzy. And I go, look at the ocean. The ocean is gorgeous. And the person driving said, dude, that's not the ocean. If that's the ocean, we have no idea where we are. And I was like, okay. And like 2 minutes later, I'm like, no, that actually is the ocean. Sometimes we don't realize that what we know, we do know, but we're not ready to hear it, or we're accustomed to living in a different perspective. Hence again, paradox. So paradox also challenges me to define myself or to undefine myself. And that for me is huge, because putting a label on me, labels can describe, create, and lift. They can also limit, dampen, and reduce. And if we look at ourselves as this truly unlimited potential, a label is often limiting. And so to really challenge the way we understand ourselves, to know, let me give a living example, to know that I am so embodied. I work with my body. For 25 years, I've been working in the body, with the body, everything from health to hacks to body work to movement to dance to yoga, you name it, body, emotional intelligence, emotional work, relating techniques and technologies. And I will sit here and say, I don't know what's going on in my body, to really acknowledge that there's something going on way beyond my perspective to realize, or to have cognizance around what I'm recognizing. Paradox also allows boundaries to vary. Boundaries, we'll probably do a whole other video on boundaries, but boundaries can definitely guide. They can definitely direct. But in my world, boundaries have to also expand. They have to be flexible. And my boundaries can expand huge and then pull back the moment I need it. It depends on my feeling of safety. It depends on my reserves. It depends on an experience that I'm opening to. And I live a life that is rather surrendered. And so my boundaries have to shift. Now, a lot would disagree with me on that, and I'm not even hard and fast on that. I'm saying that now. Paradoxically, next week I may say, you got to hold a boundary because it's how you love yourself. I don't know yet. There's the example. Everything in all points to a deeper view I have of myself. Paradox. But my view of myself is always changing. But the view of myself is incomplete. So, although it can seem absurd, or it can seem illogical, or it can seem nonsensical, I consider that there's more there. That there's a deeper view that is emerging itself regularly. So, paradox often does invite a deeper investigation. It invites a deeper journey into what is happening. It invites curiosity. That, my friends, is the magic. Curiosity Curiosity is the meta perspective. Curiosity is the one thing that I find I constantly go to come out of being owned by a thought, by a perspective, by an emotion. Not that I won't have that thought, perspective, or emotion, but curiosity makes me wonder about it. In a way, it brings that metacognition online to watch. Look at me. I'm angry right now. There's anger running through my body. Oh my God. Dude, that's funny. Look at me. I'm angry about a person cutting me off. How fucking ridiculous am I? And that's paradoxical, where I can feel the anger, not minimize it, but also feel this humor and joy about how caught up I get into it. And that's both really acknowledging, like somatically accepting something that's there, and to watch it and get to have choice and choose in any given moment. And that to me is freedom. Probably get into that another time. A lot of times we carry perspectives and they're dependent on our own perspective. And everyone has a different lens. Everyone's truly, this is all my belief, right? Everyone's truly living in their version of truth. And I do believe there's ultimate truth. And when we hear it, there's just great pause in ourselves. Yet we're living in a personal perspective. I just recently saw a little Instagram clip about this experiment that was happening where women were going into an interview. And the women were told that the makeup artist was going to come in and put a scar on them or disfigure them somehow on their face. And they'd go in and they'd paint the scar and they'd see the scar in the mirror and they'd be like, okay. And then the makeup artist just wanted to touch them up before they go into the interview. And they would remove the scar, cover it up. I'm not sure what they did. And those women went into the interview and came back with these perspectives of being prejudiced against or being judged or these kinds of things, which really show that we do carry our perspective and then project that perspective. But when we can really recognize that we're living in our own perspective, we can recognize that our perspective, our personal truth, and someone else's personal truth can happen simultaneously. And those two truths don't match up. Those two perspectives don't match up. They are illogical. They are insensical. They don't line up. It takes some deeper getting into. When we can begin to do this, we get to live outside of the box. Anytime we take, and this is kind of a grab and go notion, is anytime we take a perspective and we hold it, or I hold it as such a truth, like it can't bend, I personally often feel stuck. And so what I like to do is begin to shift with curiosity. What is the other perspective? How can it look differently to somebody else? Can I really own my own world and at the same time allow someone else to own their world? It's why in arguments or in different relating with people, the comment of we agree to disagree is such a beautiful place. Sometimes it can be an ending point, but sometimes it can be a starting point, because then you get to really try on somebody else's perspective. When you can hold an illogical explanation, not as your own, but broaden it into your world as a possibility. It's like putting it on as a coat, trying it on, and then taking it off. Paradox for me is so freeing because it brings a broader worldview. Now, it brings a broader worldview, and I recognize at the same time, and I'm talking logically, but also in our feeling. We can actually break open and broaden what we feel. When I first ever started teaching yoga, I used to be so nervous, like nauseously nervous. It was 24 years ago. Then, about 10 years later, I moved in this stage of recognizing that all of this sensation in my body, it's the same sensation for excitement, right? Maybe nerves in the belly, maybe a flush to the system, maybe my mind speeds up. Nervous. It's perspective. I can be nervous and excited at the same time. And then even in that, I can recognize those feelings are actually all very expansive. And I can be nervous and I can be excited and I can be expansive all in the same moment. And it's where I choose to carry myself in between. I can feed the nervous, I can feed the excitement, or I can feed the expansiveness. And the expansiveness is part of my teaching practice. It's actually what I'm doing to sit here today, because I put off doing these calls or these recordings. I get so excited to do them. And then at the same time, I put it off, put it off, put it off. There's a feeling of being opened up and turned open and not knowing what I'm going to say. And I make notes. I've written all this out. I know what I'm doing and I can follow it, but allowing it to emerge simultaneously requires a letting go. And that letting go out of the logical world is where paradox can show up. And paradox always just trips my trigger. The Jews, I don't know where I learned this, so please, if I'm wrong, I apologize. But one of the ways the Jews taught Jews how to learn is through debate. And what they would do is they would take a subject matter and they would each have their own, they would own a certain perspective. So, and I do this with groups. So I'll give that example of groups. So, and I tell people, I have people get together in couples and I have them really find a subject that lights them up. Maybe abortion, maybe politics, maybe health, and really be divided on it. Really know your perspective. And what we do is we share with the other person, and the other person just reflects a little bit back to make sure we're heard, and each person shares. And you can sit there and debate. You can prove your points. You can give A, B, C to give the explanation, why it makes sense, why it's logical. Then the other person goes. Then we switch. Then you have to debate the other person's perspective back to them. You have to work hard enough to convince them. And in that, you may not believe it fully, but there's a part of you that has to try on believing it. Try on opening up to it. Try it on like a coat. You can always take it back off, but try it on just as well. And at the end, there's such a huge degree of compassion. There's a wealth of growth in understanding, the ability to relate. And that's because we allow paradox to be. We allow the illogical to be. If we broke it down into archetypes, as you allow the feminine, the heart space, the felt space, the unknowing space, the creator space to be, rather than the directive, disciplined, thoughtful, logical side. Again, they both have their place and there is mutual support. But living in paradox is really giving ourselves the opportunity to not feel like we know it all. Sometimes that's really humbling. And yet it is so freeing. And it's extraordinarily powerful. How do we miss this? All right, so at the same time, we have to be able to call a spade a spade. At the same time, we have to say something just is. But that analogy is awesome. And here's why I like that analogy. Call a spade a spade. This is what it is. This is where non-paradoxical people can really get clear, like, yep, but it is this way. A spade is a spade. And then I sit there and say, well, what's a spade? And what's a spade? How did you just answer that right now listening to that? If you're thinking about cards, a spade is that shape, like a leaf. If you're a gardener, a spade is a shovel, much like the broken one right outside my window. So again, it comes back to perspective. When we call a spade, it's from our own level of consciousness or our own level of thinking. And even in that analogy of just saying what it is, what is it? What is it? And it can shift. It can depend. It depends on the context. And that brings us back to that multidimensional bit. What is the context in which we're speaking of? A person in a regular 3D world? Are we talking about the child of God inside of me? Are we talking about even my own inner child? Are we talking about divinity within me? Are we talking about the parts of me that can recognize past lives or capacities or connections to outer worldly places? Am I saying those things right now? And I just immediately lost you because you're like, that stuff doesn't really exist. Well, to me, it does. But I get to you, it doesn't. So it doesn't. Or does it? That's where you get to hold your reality. This is where paradox is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And we can get into that and unpack that even when we talk about relationships. And this is an interesting one. One could ask me, am I in a relationship? I relate to people all the time. So yeah, I'm in lots of relationships. But I know what people mean when they say, am I in a relationship? Am I dating someone romantically? Yep. And what's a date? What do you actually mean when you use your words? What are you actually getting across? And I'm going to imagine we all know what abracadabra means, not just magic, but what you say becomes, because our throat chakra is powerful enough to make manifest, to put things into the world. But how often we skip by that and use words very loosely because they may not have a match yet to what's happening more deeply to us. And that's an important journey, is to have your languaging begin to reflect what you feel internally. So there's a match, an alignment. And perhaps when someone's asking me if I'm in a relationship, what they're really wanting to ask is if I'm available to them. Maybe they're wanting to ask, who do I love and want to spend my time with romantically? Maybe they want to know if I'm dating someone or just seeing someone. Maybe they want to know if it's a deep commitment. Maybe they want to know if I'm married. I don't really actually know. But what I do know is when I hear the phrase, are you in a relationship? What does that mean? And this is where our words guide us back to our inner desires, our inner wants, getting clearer and clearer on where we're at in the world. I got a little chart here, true power. True power, there's 5 things on this list. The first one is to know thyself. And to know thyself means that we can constantly come back to paradox. I want to know if you're in a relationship. Well, I don't want to know if you're in a relationship. What I want to know is ... Because yeah, we're all in a relationship. I'm in a relationship with this chair right now. I'm kind of codependent on this chair right now. So where do we go with that? So paradox is a practice. It breaks mental and logical contractions and limitations. I would say it really is a practice to recognize and grow a self-awareness around what we ask, what we want, what we're looking at, what we're noticing, the internal structure at which we are living in. That again goes back to our worldview, our personal worldview story, that it's built according to a certain framework. And are we willing to break down that framework and then rebuild a new one, or to strip away one to see then one deeper in? But that means we need to be able to hold or be in disbelief or be in a place of illogic and let nothing hold us for a period of time, to break that mental and illogical contractions and limitations. That's a journey. That is really learning how to, man, how do I say that? Recognizing all that you emanate beyond the sliver of what we know. Yeah. Like a flower. A flower is just in its being. Even though we say flowers, they open up to attract bees or attract bugs or attract flowers or birds. Yeah, that's logical. We see that happen. Do we consider that the buzz of the bees, the birds of the chirp. Actually, that frequency, maybe they actually open up the flowers, because that's actually true. They actually create the resonance for flowers to open, for buds to open, for new growth in the spring to occur. It's not the other way around. Well, there's the paradox. It's both. It's both. It's both and. Both and. Both and. Beautiful concept in consciousness and in growth. It transcend and include. We don't leave anything behind. We can still let super rudimentary things exist. Santa exists. He may exist as dad. He may exist as uncle. He exists as somebody on the street. He exists as a feeling, a memory, a nostalgia, a hope, a dream, a sense of a season. It may be different than we thought, but still exists. All depends on what we feed, what we nourish, the anxiety, the excitement, the expansion. Paradox is everywhere. We see it. We're human beings, yet we're mostly human doings. Are we just human being and doing? Right? Are we spiritual beings looking for a human experience, or human beings looking for a spiritual experience? What if being a human being looking for a spiritual experience, we get to recognize that we're spiritual beings looking for a human experience, looking for spiritualness, right? It is paradoxical on how one feeds another. It's paradoxical how I can share about this, yet learn so much about it, hearing myself talk, leaving this video for you, where I can learn from what I'm saying, not even realizing it until right now as I say it, because I wasn't planning on saying that. Super paradoxical, super cool. Yeah, we're humans. We're souls. What part of us is talking? What dimensional existence are we in that's speaking? And you can hear it when you talk to people. You can hear people share. They're sharing from their wounded place, their inner child place, from their teenager boldness, from their adult clear-cuttedness, or their parental side. You can hear all these different personas show up in conversation, and they'll be paradoxical. And it's beautiful to watch. It's beautiful to see the stages and parts blooming in all of the flowers. Make your boundaries elastic. Stretch to the moon and back. Be wherever needed and who is needed in those moments. My boundaries like to be elastic. I like to be mobile. I like to be flexible. I like to be grounded. I like to be consistent. And I have the belief that they all coexist simultaneously. I can be a bird flying, a fish swimming, and a monkey climbing at the same time. And there may not be words to describe it, but it exists within me. So if I were to leave you with a question or with a curiosity, is where is your curiosity? How do you recognize when you're held back from something more? And how do you know that you're the one holding yourself back through a belief system you've chosen to believe? How do we recognize that? I got a whole slew of answers for me, but where do you recognize it? Where can you come up against illogical things? When was the last time you said to yourself, that was the dumbest thing, and I would do it again? Paradox. Life is there. When you feel alive, when there's that hum in your system, that's living. That's in many ways leadership, actually. To feel so much moving through you and to stay with it. And to not let logic drop you in, pull you down. It can ground you, can keep you stable. It can give you a place to move from. Paradox. I love living in paradox. Thank you for dropping into my world for a moment. Thank you for listening to that unpacking of paradox. And I'm sure it leaves you with more questions, because I didn't come to answer a question. I came to really share how my inner world works in that realm. If you want to know more, holler. Again, with any and all of these, I'm ready to do, we're ready to do more videos. So be well, enjoy, stay curious, get meta, drop in, lift out, be in both, and in all of it simultaneously. All right, folks, we'll see you soon.